For all that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
Before I write section 1, one important note. The reference transcript you uploaded is built around dramatic claims presented as fact, secret plots, swapped name tags, punishments, etc., but there is no verified evidence that these events actually happened. For a strong royal documentary script, it's better to frame such elements as questions, perceptions, speculation, and royal watcher interpretations, not established facts. At Royal Ascot, most cameras were expected to focus on one thing: the return of Catherine, Princess of Wales. After months of public concern surrounding her health, many believed the event would become a powerful symbol of continuity, resilience, and the future of the monarchy. Yet before a single carriage rolled forward, attention began shifting toward a different question entirely. Why were some royal observers suddenly talking about Queen Camilla, and what did Prince William's reaction reveal about a deeper struggle over image, influence, and the future direction of the royal family? For much of the public, Royal Ascot has always represented more than horse racing. It is one of those rare occasions when tradition, symbolism, and royal visibility combine into a single spectacle watched across Britain and far beyond. This year, however, expectations were unusually high. The anticipated appearance of Catherine, Princess of Wales, carried emotional significance that extended well beyond fashion, ceremony, or protocol. Many supporters viewed her presence as evidence of strength after a difficult period, while others saw it as a reassuring glimpse of stability within an institution that has faced considerable scrutiny in recent years. That alone would have guaranteed worldwide attention. But what made the situation more fascinating was the growing sense that different members of the royal family were entering the event with very different priorities. On one side stood Prince William, the Prince of Wales, increasingly viewed as the future face of the monarchy. Beside him was Catherine, whose popularity had only intensified during her absence from public life. Together, they represented continuity, renewal, and the next chapter of royal leadership. Yet another question was quietly emerging behind the scenes. Where exactly did Queen Camilla fit into that picture? The Queen had spent years navigating one of the most difficult public image transformations in modern royal history. Her position within the institution had been earned through patience, persistence, and gradual public acceptance. Nevertheless, royal history repeatedly demonstrates that popularity and authority do not always move in the same direction. Sometimes the individuals who command the most attention are not necessarily those who hold the highest formal rank. That distinction matters, because as Catherine's return approached, commentators began noticing something unusual. Conversations surrounding Royal Ascot were increasingly focused on the Princess of Wales rather than the reigning queen. Headlines, television segments, and social media discussions seemed drawn toward the future rather than the present. For some observers, that shift was entirely natural. For others, it highlighted a growing reality that Buckingham Palace may eventually need to manage carefully. The monarchy thrives on hierarchy, but public fascination often follows a different set of rules. And that raises an intriguing question. When the institution finds itself balancing a reigning generation and a future generation simultaneously, who becomes the symbolic center of attention? The answer is not always straightforward. Throughout royal history, moments of transition have often created subtle tensions, not necessarily personal tensions, but institutional ones. Public interest naturally gravitates toward the figures who represent tomorrow. In the current era, many analysts believe that Prince William and Catherine increasingly occupy that role. Every appearance, every photograph, every public engagement is examined not only for what it says about the present monarchy, but for what it suggests about the monarchy that may eventually follow. That growing focus creates opportunities, but it also creates challenges. Because while Catherine's return generated enormous goodwill, it simultaneously amplified discussions about succession, generational change, and the evolving priorities of the royal household. Suddenly, an event that should have been straightforward became layered with symbolism. Was this simply a celebration of Catherine's recovery? Or was it becoming something larger? A public reminder of where many people believe the future of the institution now resides. As those questions circulated, Prince William appeared increasingly determined to maintain a clear message. Throughout recent years, the Prince of Wales has consistently emphasized stability, duty, and family unity. Yet he has also demonstrated a willingness to protect Catherine from unnecessary pressures and distractions. That protective instinct has become one of the defining features of William's public role. Royal watchers have noticed it repeatedly. Whenever scrutiny intensifies, whenever speculation grows louder, the future king often seems focused on ensuring that attention remains directed toward the broader purpose rather than personal controversies. Some commentators interpret that approach as strategic leadership. Others see it as evidence of a husband determined to shield his family from the turbulence that has affected previous generations. Either way, it has become impossible to ignore. And that is where the royal Ascot story begins to take on a deeper significance. Because beneath the elegant hats, polished carriages, and carefully choreographed traditions lies a much larger question about influence inside the modern monarchy. Not necessarily influence measured by titles or official authority, but influence measured by public affection, media attention, and symbolic importance. Those forms of influence can be extraordinarily powerful. In some cases, they shape public perception more effectively than any official announcement ever could. As royal Ascot approached, many expected a celebration. What few anticipated was that the event would also spark renewed discussion about visibility, succession, and the delicate balance between established authority and emerging leadership. The public may have arrived expecting a pageant, but increasingly they found themselves examining something else entirely. Who truly represents the future image of the royal family? And if that question is already generating debate today, what might happen when the spotlight grows even brighter in the months ahead? Because what unfolded next would transform a routine royal appearance into a much larger conversation about power, perception, and the future of the crown. What made the discussion surrounding royal Ascot particularly interesting was not the event itself, but the speed with which attention shifted away from ceremony and toward questions of influence. Royal events are carefully structured, carefully timed, and carefully managed. Yet every so often, an appearance begins generating conversations that extend far beyond the official schedule. This seemed to be one of those moments. As images of Catherine, Princess of Wales, circulated, many commentators focused on her return, but others began examining something less obvious. Why did the reaction feel so significant? After all, members of the royal family appear at public events regularly. What made this appearance different? Part of the answer may lie in timing. The monarchy currently finds itself navigating a period unlike any it has experienced in decades. King Charles III continues to carry out his constitutional responsibilities while simultaneously facing public attention surrounding his health. At the same time, Prince William has assumed an increasingly visible role, often representing continuity and future leadership in the minds of many observers. Those two realities are unfolding simultaneously, creating a unique dynamic inside the institution. And that dynamic may explain why seemingly ordinary moments now attract extraordinary levels of analysis. Several royal commentators have noted that whenever public attention becomes heavily concentrated on the next generation, questions about transition inevitably follow. Not because a transition is necessarily imminent, but because the public naturally begins imagining what comes next. In that environment, every photograph, every appearance, and every interaction can take on a larger meaning than originally intended. That may help explain why discussions surrounding Catherine's appearance quickly evolved into broader conversations about the future direction of the monarchy itself. But another question soon emerged. If public enthusiasm increasingly centers on William and Catherine, how does the institution balance celebrating that popularity while maintaining focus on the current reign? The answer is not simple, because royal institutions operate on two different levels simultaneously. One level is constitutional authority. The other is public perception. History shows those two forces do not always move together. In many ways, public perception can become a form of influence in its own right. Observers have frequently pointed to previous periods in royal history when individual members attracted such intense public interest that they effectively became symbols of an entire era. What matters is not merely who appears in headlines. What matters is what those headlines begin to represent. And increasingly, some analysts believe Catherine represents something larger than personal popularity. To supporters, she embodies stability during uncertainty. To others, she represents continuity between generations. Still others see her as a key figure in maintaining public confidence during a period of significant change. Whether one agrees with those interpretations or not, their existence helps explain why her return generated such intense attention. Yet that realization creates another layer of complexity, because whenever one figure becomes a symbol of institutional confidence, expectations inevitably rise. Every appearance begins carrying greater significance. Every absence becomes more noticeable. Every public engagement attracts additional scrutiny, and that raises a concern that some royal watchers have quietly discussed for months. Has the monarchy become increasingly dependent upon a relatively small number of individuals to carry its public image? It is a delicate question. Royal households traditionally rely on multiple senior figures sharing responsibilities across hundreds of engagements each year. However, public attention rarely distributes itself evenly. Some personalities naturally attract greater interest than others. When that happens, institutions must carefully manage both opportunity and risk. The opportunity is obvious. Strong public support can strengthen confidence in the monarchy. The risk is less obvious. Concentrating public attention around a handful of figures can unintentionally create expectations that become difficult to sustain over time. That may be one reason why recent appearances have been examined so closely, not because of any single event, but because they offer clues about how the institution is adapting to changing circumstances. Meanwhile, another development was beginning to attract attention among experienced royal observers. For years, discussions about succession largely focused on constitutional procedure. Recently, however, those discussions have become increasingly centered on public readiness. Some commentators argue that the public is already viewing William and Catherine through the lens of future leadership rather than simply their current positions. That distinction matters more than it may initially appear, because institutions often change gradually in official terms while changing rapidly in public perception. The public does not wait for formal milestones before forming impressions. In many cases, those impressions are established years in advance. If that process is already underway, then Royal Ascot may have represented more than a successful public appearance. It may have provided a glimpse into how audiences are beginning to view the next chapter of royal life. Yet even that interpretation leaves important questions unanswered. How aware is the institution itself of these shifting perceptions? Are senior advisors actively encouraging this evolution, or are events simply unfolding naturally as public interest responds to changing circumstances? Reports suggest there are differing views among royal analysts. Some believe the increased prominence of William and Catherine reflects long-term strategic planning designed to ensure continuity. Others argue that public sentiment has evolved organically and that palace officials are merely adapting to realities they cannot fully control. That disagreement is fascinating because it points toward a much larger issue. Who shapes the future image of the monarchy? The institution itself, the media, or the public? Perhaps the answer involves all three. As those debates continued, another subtle observation began emerging from commentators who study royal communications. They noted that conversations about Catherine's return often generated discussions about leadership, duty, resilience, and continuity. Those are not simply personal qualities. They are institutional qualities, and when personal narratives begin reinforcing institutional narratives, public impact can become remarkably powerful. That may explain why the story continues attracting attention long after the initial event. The discussion is no longer solely about Royal Ascot. It is no longer solely about one appearance. Instead, it increasingly appears to be part of a broader conversation regarding how the royal family presents itself during a period of transition, uncertainty, and heightened public scrutiny. Yet perhaps the most intriguing question has not been answered at all. If Catherine's return strengthened perceptions of stability, and if William's visibility continues to grow alongside that narrative, what happens when future events place those perceptions under greater pressure? Because some royal observers believe the real test has not happened yet, and the developments beginning to emerge behind the scenes may reveal far more about the future balance of influence within the monarchy than anything seen at Royal Ascot itself. The more closely royal observers examine the conversation surrounding Royal Ascot, the more they began reaching a surprising conclusion. The event itself may never have been the central story. Instead, it appears to have acted as a lens through which several larger developments suddenly became visible at the same time. One of those developments involves a challenge that every modern monarchy eventually faces, even if it is rarely discussed openly. How does an institution prepare the public for the future while remaining fully committed to the present? At first glance, that may seem like a simple balancing act. In reality, it is one of the most delicate responsibilities any royal household must manage. The reason is straightforward. Public attention rarely follows official structures perfectly. People tend to focus on personalities, relationships, and symbols. Institutions, meanwhile, must focus on continuity, hierarchy, and stability. Most of the time, those interests align. Occasionally, they begin pulling in different directions. Some royal commentators have suggested that this may help explain why certain appearances attract disproportionate attention. The interest is not necessarily about the appearance itself. It is about what the appearance seems to represent. And that observation connects several pieces of the puzzle. When viewers responded so strongly to Catherine's return, they were not simply reacting to one public engagement. Many were responding to what her presence symbolized after a period of uncertainty. In a sense, the emotional reaction extended beyond the individual and toward the institution she represents. That may explain why discussions quickly expanded into questions about leadership, continuity, and public confidence. But another layer soon becomes visible. If public confidence is increasingly associated with particular figures, then those figures inevitably become more important to the institution's long-term strategy. Not because of their titles alone, but because public trust has become one of the monarchy's most valuable assets. Royal watchers have pointed out that modern monarchies operate in a dramatically different environment than previous generations. Public visibility is constant. Media cycles move rapidly. Every appearance is analyzed across television, newspapers, social media platforms, and international audiences simultaneously. In that environment, perception becomes part of governance. That does not mean image replaces substance. Rather, it means image and substance become increasingly difficult to separate. Suddenly, what appears to be a discussion about popularity becomes a discussion about institutional resilience. And that may explain why analysts continue returning to Prince William's role in these conversations. The Prince of Wales occupies a uniquely complicated position. He is neither the reigning monarch nor an ordinary senior royal. His responsibilities require him to support the present while preparing for the future. Those objectives sound compatible, yet history demonstrates they can create significant pressures behind the scenes. The heir must demonstrate leadership without appearing impatient. He must build public trust without overshadowing the monarch. He must prepare for eventual responsibility without encouraging speculation about when that responsibility might arrive. Viewed through that lens, some of William's recent appearances begin to look less like isolated events and more like evidence of a broader preparation process already underway. Yet even that interpretation raises further questions. Preparation for what, exactly? A future reign? A generational transition? Or simply a changing public environment that requires new approaches to royal leadership? Reports indicate there is no universal agreement among commentators. Some believe the institution is deliberately elevating the visibility of the next generation to ensure stability over the coming decade. Others argue that public interest itself is driving the process, forcing palace strategists to adapt rather than lead. That distinction matters because it changes how the entire story is understood. If the shift is intentional, it reflects long-term planning. If it is organic, it suggests public sentiment may be influencing the institution more than many assume. Either possibility carries significant implications. And there is another pattern that experienced royal audiences may recognize. Throughout modern royal history, periods of transition often begin long before formal constitutional changes occur. The public gradually develops expectations. Media narratives evolve. Attention starts settling on figures who represent the future rather than the present. Only later does everyone realize the transition had effectively begun years earlier. That historical pattern does not prove anything about current events. However, it does explain why certain observers are paying such close attention now. Because they are not necessarily looking at what happened. They are looking at what might be developing. The distinction is crucial. Consider how conversations surrounding the royal family have evolved over recent years. Increasingly, discussions revolve around themes such as continuity, modernization, public trust, family stability, and long-term leadership. Those are not short-term concerns. They are questions that shape institutions across generations. And once those themes become dominant, every significant public appearance starts contributing to a much larger narrative. That may explain why even small developments sometimes generate surprisingly extensive analysis. People are searching for signals. Signals about priorities. Signals about relationships. Signals about the future direction of the monarchy. But perhaps the most revealing connection involves timing. Several royal commentators have noted that moments of heightened attention often arrive precisely when institutions are attempting to project confidence. Whether intentionally or not, Catherine's return occurred during a period when reassurance carried unusual value. The resulting public reaction may therefore reveal as much about audience concerns as it does about royal strategy. In other words, the popularity of certain figures could be telling us something broader about what people currently want from the monarchy itself. That possibility changes the story yet again. Because if audiences increasingly associate stability with particular individuals, then future institutional decisions may be evaluated through that lens, whether palace officials intend it or not. And that creates a fascinating challenge. How does the monarchy preserve its identity as an enduring institution while simultaneously benefiting from the popularity of specific personalities? There is no easy answer. History suggests every royal generation must eventually confront that question in its own way. Yet one unresolved issue continues hovering over everything discussed so far. Many observers have focused on William, Catherine, and public perception. Others have examined questions of succession and long-term planning. But comparatively little attention has been given to what may be happening inside the institution itself as these pressures continue building. Because if public expectations are changing faster than official structures, and if key figures are increasingly becoming symbols of stability in their own right, then there may be conversations occurring behind palace walls that the public has only begun to glimpse. And if those conversations are influencing decisions more than anyone realizes, then the next piece of the story may force an entirely different interpretation of everything that has happened so far. As those questions continued building, the story began moving beyond public perception and into something considerably more consequential. The discussion was no longer centered on who attracted attention at a particular event. Instead, it increasingly focused on how the monarchy manages influence during periods when expectations, responsibilities, and public sentiment are all changing simultaneously. That shift is important because institutions rarely face pressure from a single direction. More often, multiple forces begin converging at once. Public expectations evolve, media narratives accelerate, internal responsibilities expand. Strategic decisions that once seemed routine suddenly acquire greater significance because they are interpreted through a much broader lens. Some royal commentators believe this convergence may be exactly what we are witnessing now. Consider the position facing the Prince of Wales. Expectations surrounding William appear to be growing from several directions simultaneously. Public support remains strong. International attention continues increasing. The visibility of Catherine, Princess of Wales, has reinforced discussions about future leadership. Meanwhile, every appearance by the couple is now evaluated not only as a present-day engagement, but as a possible indication of future priorities. The consequence is subtle but powerful. Actions that might once have been viewed as routine expressions of support for a spouse are increasingly interpreted as demonstrations of leadership style. Decisions that previously attracted little attention now generate detailed analysis regarding authority, judgment, and institutional direction. That growing scrutiny creates pressure, not necessarily pressure created by critics, but pressure created by expectation itself. And expectations have a tendency to reshape the environment around those expected to meet them. This may explain why royal analysts have increasingly focused on questions of influence rather than rank. Formal hierarchy within the monarchy remains unchanged. Yet influence operates differently. Influence is often measured through confidence, trust, visibility, and symbolic importance. Over time, those forms of influence can affect how every subsequent development is interpreted. The result is a feedback cycle. Public confidence generates attention. Attention increases expectations. Expectations increase scrutiny. Scrutiny increases the significance of future decisions. And those future decisions then generate even greater interest. Several royal watchers have noted that this cycle appears to be accelerating rather than slowing. If that assessment is correct, then the implications extend well beyond one event or one season of royal appearances. They begin touching the institution's long-term planning. Because another question is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. How does the monarchy distribute responsibility when public attention becomes concentrated around a limited number of figures? That challenge is not new. Yet modern communications have intensified it dramatically. Every image can circulate globally within minutes. Every public appearance becomes available for immediate interpretation. Every perceived signal can generate countless competing narratives. As a result, the institution must balance visibility with sustainability. Too little visibility creates uncertainty. Too much concentration creates dependency. Finding the balance between those two outcomes is extraordinarily difficult, and some observers believe recent developments may reveal how seriously that challenge is being taken. Reports suggest that discussions surrounding continuity and stability have become increasingly important in public coverage of the royal family. What makes that notable is that continuity and stability are not short-term objectives. They are long-term institutional priorities. When those themes begin dominating public conversation, it often indicates that audiences are evaluating events differently than before. Instead of asking what happened today, people begin asking what today's events suggest about tomorrow. That subtle change may explain why reactions to Catherine's return carried such significance. The response was not merely emotional. It was interpretive. People appeared to be drawing conclusions. Conclusions about resilience. Conclusions about leadership. Conclusions about the future image of the monarchy. Whether those conclusions are accurate remains open to debate. Yet their existence alone creates consequences. Because institutions must eventually respond to public expectations, even when those expectations emerge organically. At the same time, another layer of pressure may be developing beneath the surface. Royal commentators have increasingly pointed out that periods of strong public support often create strategic dilemmas rather than strategic simplicity. The reason is straightforward. Success generates choices. Which voices should become more prominent? Which responsibilities should expand? How quickly should visible leadership evolve? How much preparation should occur publicly versus privately? Those questions rarely receive official answers. Nevertheless, they shape decisions in ways the public may never fully see. And that brings multiple strands of a story together. The heightened attention surrounding Catherine, the growing visibility of William, the continuing discussions regarding continuity, the broader interest in future leadership, the increasing focus on institutional stability. Viewed separately, each development appears manageable. Viewed together, they suggest something more significant. A gradual shift in how the monarchy is being perceived. Not officially, not constitutionally, but psychologically. And psychological shifts often occur long before structural changes follow. That possibility has led some analysts to examine recent events from a completely different perspective. Rather than asking whether specific appearances were successful, they ask whether those appearances are helping shape expectations that may eventually influence future decisions. If so, the consequences become much larger than individual headlines. Because expectations, once established, can become remarkably difficult to reverse. Yet perhaps the most revealing reaction has come from the public itself. Many discussions that began with one event have steadily expanded into conversations about responsibility, readiness, and long-term leadership. That progression suggests audiences may already be connecting dots that previously remained separate. And if the public is beginning to see those connections, palace advisors are almost certainly aware of them as well. Which raises a question that may be more important than any discussed so far. What happens when public expectations, institutional planning, and future leadership narratives begin moving in the same direction at the same time? Some observers believe that is precisely the point where royal stories stop being about appearances and start becoming about decisions. Not decisions that are announced, decisions that are prepared. And if that preparation is already underway in ways the public only partially understands, then the next development may reveal that everything discussed so far, from visibility and influence to continuity and public trust, has been pointing toward a much larger turning point than anyone initially realized. What makes this story particularly revealing is that, by this stage, the discussion has moved far beyond the original question of visibility, attention, or even royal Ascot itself. The deeper significance lies in what the reaction exposed. It revealed how closely public confidence, future leadership, and institutional stability have become intertwined in the minds of many observers. Once that connection becomes visible, the entire story begins to look different. At the beginning, it appeared that people were debating personalities. By the end, many were discussing something much larger: preparedness. Not preparedness in a constitutional sense, but preparedness in the public imagination. Royal institutions rely heavily on continuity. The public must feel that leadership today connects naturally to leadership tomorrow. What Royal Ascot seemed to demonstrate was that many people are already viewing certain figures through that future-oriented lens. That realization matters because public trust is one of the few royal assets that cannot be manufactured through ceremony alone. It develops gradually, often over many years, through consistency, reliability, and visible commitment to duty. Some royal commentators have noted that Catherine, Princess of Wales, has increasingly come to represent those qualities for a significant portion of the public. At the same time, Prince William appears to have inherited a different but equally important expectation, demonstrating that he can guide the institution through periods of change without compromising stability. Viewed together, those developments suggest that the strongest reaction surrounding Royal Ascot may not have been about what happened that day. It may have been about what people believe it revealed. And that leads to another important insight. Institutions often reveal their future direction long before they formally announce it. Not through declarations or policy changes, but through patterns. Patterns of responsibility, patterns of visibility, patterns of trust. Over time, those patterns become increasingly difficult to ignore because they begin appearing across multiple events rather than isolated moments. Some analysts have suggested that this is why conversations surrounding the Prince and Princess of Wales continue expanding beyond individual engagements. Audiences are no longer evaluating single appearances in isolation. They are connecting appearances into a broader narrative. Every successful engagement, every demonstration of resilience, every indication of public support becomes another piece of a larger picture. That picture appears to center on continuity. Yet continuity itself is not the ultimate story. The deeper story may be adaptation. Modern monarchies face challenges very different from those encountered by previous generations. Public expectations evolve faster. Information moves faster. Institutions are expected to remain rooted in tradition while simultaneously demonstrating relevance within a rapidly changing world. Balancing those objectives requires more than ceremonial expertise. It requires strategic judgment. This may explain why discussions about future leadership have become increasingly prominent. Leadership within a monarchy is often misunderstood as a matter of inheritance alone. In reality, public legitimacy is strengthened through years of visible service, accumulated trust, and demonstrated responsibility. The public does not merely observe future leaders. It gradually forms conclusions about them. And once those conclusions become widespread, they begin influencing the environment surrounding the institution itself. That process appears to be accelerating. Reports indicate that discussions about the future of the monarchy are increasingly framed around themes such as service, stability, resilience, and continuity rather than spectacle or personality. That shift is significant because it suggests audiences may be evaluating the royal family through a more institutional lens. In other words, people are asking fewer questions about individual moments and more questions about long-term direction. What kind of monarchy is being built? What values will define its future? How will leadership evolve while preserving continuity? Those questions are far more consequential than any single event. They also help explain why royal observers paid such close attention to the reactions surrounding Royal Ascot. The event became a focal point because it appeared to illuminate broader trends already underway. Trends that might otherwise have remained difficult to see. Yet perhaps the most important revelation concerns expectations. Expectations are powerful because they create their own momentum. Once the public begins associating particular individuals with stability and future leadership, those expectations become increasingly influential. Future appearances are interpreted through that framework. Future decisions are evaluated against that framework. Even future challenges are viewed through that framework. The consequence, is that responsibility expands long before authority formally changes. Some royal watchers believe this may be one of the defining realities facing the next generation of royal leadership. Expectations are arriving earlier, becoming larger, and attracting more attention than previous generations experienced. Whether that represents an opportunity or a challenge remains uncertain. Most likely it is both. Opportunities arise because strong public trust provides stability during periods of change. Challenges arise because maintaining that trust requires consistency over many years. And that brings us to what may ultimately be the lasting significance of this story. It was never simply about who received attention. It was never solely about one appearance. It was never exclusively about Royal Ascot. Instead, it highlighted a broader conversation taking place across the monarchy, the media, and the public simultaneously. A conversation about continuity, leadership, responsibility, and the future shape of the institution itself. Some observers believe we are witnessing the early stages of a gradual evolution rather than a sudden transformation. Others argue that the changes are largely perceptual and that the institution remains exactly where it has always been. Both interpretations contain elements worth considering. What remains difficult to dismiss, however, is the growing sense that public expectations are becoming increasingly aligned around questions of future leadership. And when expectations, visibility, trust, and institutional planning begin intersecting, even seemingly routine events can acquire lasting significance. The immediate situation may now be clearer. The broader future remains unwritten. What Royal Ascot appears to have revealed is not a conclusion, but a process already unfolding. A process shaped by public confidence, guided by institutional priorities, and influenced by the individuals who increasingly symbolize the monarchy's future. Whether historians eventually view moments like this as routine developments or as early indicators of a larger transition remains impossible to know today. But perhaps that is the most fascinating question of all. Was this simply another chapter in the ongoing story of the royal family, or was it an early glimpse of how the monarchy is quietly preparing for the generations that will eventually define its next era? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess Anne, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.